Hello.
Blessings.
What's your name?
My name is Vaun.
Hey Vaughan. And where did you grow up and
So-
where do you live now?
I grew up in South London and I now live in East London.
Nice short little journey.
Basically, it's so short, yeah.
And what's been the predominant contemplative or spiritual practice of your life?
I would definitely say kirtan or Bhakti yoga, maybe is probably the better word to use.
And how did that become a thing that became part of you?
So I remember walking down Oxford Street and then finding myself just stumbling down Tottenham Court Road, kind of lost. I was in my early 20s and I've always been into esoteric, occult things. So crystals and palmistry and tarot and all of these beautiful spiritual constructs. But then I found myself at a bit of a crossroad. And then I remember this person in robes walked up to me, and it was a white guy in robes, and I was like, okay, I'm not really sure what's happening here. And then the first thing he said to me was, oh, are you a model? And I was like, uh-oh. And then they just started talking to me, and they invited me to lunch. And they said, oh, we have a temple just around the corner, and we have a lunchtime class, and I feel like you would love it. And I was like, okay, all right. And I wasn't really going anywhere else. And then that was my first exposure to ISKCON, Krishna consciousness. And it's kind of been fermenting since that point.
What did that, when you went in with that guy to that class, what was in that class that made you go, this is it?
Do you know, it kind of wasn't, there's like a spark. It was more along the lines of, I was looking around and I was seeing all of the paintings, all of the reverence that they had, and how moved they all were, and how joyful and how emotional they were. I mean, in the middle of Tottenham Court Road, and it's like, this is happening. People are barging past you, or you're distracted and you're moving fast. Everything's so fast, everything's so cold. Everything is so protected, and there is such a contrast between different individuals. So there's so many people concentrated in one space, and yet you see all of the dynamics of class and race and this and that and all of these layers. And then you go into the temple, and then you see all types of people together, and they're just talking about Krishna consciousness, or just Krishna in general. And I feel like it was the beauty of what Krishna represented that really made sense to me in a way that I can't really explain, because it was with Krishna. But then I also did a practice called Satya Yoga, and then there was another practice called Satyahara Yoga. So then there were things that I was exposed to, but it was the system of Bhakti, which is the Krishna movement, or more so associated with the Krishna movement, that made the most sense to me, because it was more simple. It wasn't complex. There wasn't, mudras and complex things. It was just, you just read and you recite the mantra, the Maha Mantra, and you just keep doing it. And so, okay, and what's the catch? There is no catch. The divine love just comes. And so, but when? Well, we don't know when. You just keep doing it. And yeah, that's how it kind of started for me.
So you always had this, sounds like you always had this kind of way of looking at the world that was wider anyway. What was the spark when you said there's the occult and stuff like that? Yeah. What was, if you went back, what was the way of looking at the world from a different lens?
So I was raised in foster care. My mother had a mental illness. So for me, my world was not the average world that a child kind of sees. I remember being very young and being exposed to my mum having a breakdown, or an episode, should I say, and being very aware that I would have to be the adult in this situation, and also being told to be the adult, to be the responsible one if such an instance should happen, because that was the reality. You know, Vaun, I mean, I remember being 6 or 7 years old and really starting to understand how my mum was acting in comparison to other adults. And as well, losing control, because to me at that point it was a loss of control. I didn't really understand what mental illness was, but I knew that my mum was losing control because it was a contrast of how she was when she was well, how composed and how beautiful and how poised and graceful and articulate and intelligent. Of course, all of these words I can formalize, like I can say now, but back then I just saw my mum in a certain way, and then I saw a flip. And then I just knew then that the way that I would have to go about the world would have to be very different, especially since I couldn't really relate. I mean, they call it secondary and or primary and secondary socialization. So my primary socialization was me bouncing from foster home to foster home, being put in very different situations with very different families. And this was, I think before they had this law about black kids have to be of black families and so on. So I was everywhere. So I was always exposed to different people. And I even remember staying with an Asian family, a few Asian families at the time fostering me. So I guess maybe in a weird way, thinking of it now, that's probably why I was a bit more open or susceptible to engaging with different spiritual practices, because maybe in some way I've already been exposed subconsciously. I just wasn't aware. Yeah.
So that must have been, I mean, that's kind of challenging childhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so when you went and found like the Bhakti,
Well, when Bhakti found me,
Bhakti
I guess.
found you, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like there's such a familial kind of concept to it, isn't it?
Yeah. I think what I liked most about Bhakti, or how it felt for me, was the fact that I was always very spiritual, and I was always. So when I was young, I always used to hear and see and feel more like angels or presence, like just essences of something that I couldn't really explain. And I was always saying, like, I can hear this and I can see this. And I didn't really know what it was. And obviously the adults around me didn't really encourage it. So it was kind of like, you shouldn't do that. And as well, I feel like because of what situation happened with my mum, I'm not sure if they were a bit, not nervous, but just like, you know, be realistic, stop daydreaming, stop talking to whatever you're talking to. So for me, I feel like there was probably always something guiding me, protecting me, grounding me, and just exposing me to things that were beneficial to my elevation. Because that's how I feel that my whole trajectory of life has been. It's been a constant desire to elevate. And even when, at times when I would hit rock bottom, in the sense of growing up and trying to understand how that then works for me being black and not feeling that black, or me being born male and not feeling male, and then me being queer and not understanding what that means, because there is no, like, when you're at school, there is no kind of sexual education around what queer people do. Maybe there is now, but there wasn't when I was young. And when you look on TV, all the figures that you see, it's very specific images. And this then really disrupts your train of thought, because everything you do, you feel like, I'm not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not really valued. So I have to oppress my own feelings, suppress my own feelings, because of the external oppression that is something that people aren't really aware of. And then, I'm not even sure what the question is now, actually. I'm just going on. What was the question?
I think it's just this evolution. I think it's just this process for, like, you know, from this really young child, you know, to what the calling of Krishna created for you. And then I'm interested that kind of evolution from that calling to the process of where we find you.
Okay, so in regards to my journey with, I would call it Hinduism as such, or Sanatana Dharma may be more appropriate because of the political connotations and the social constructs that are within Hinduism. And I have to be very mindful because what I've found is, it's a very sacred, revered way of life when you're Hindu or when you ascribe to Sanatana Dharma. And then the people that you meet, and how you share that part of yourself. And for some people, I've noticed that there is a bit of a resistance or a trigger that comes up when I say these things. So I have to be quite mindful. But ultimately, with Krishna consciousness and the Bhakti, the devotional way, it was just something that was a seed. And over time, it's when I would realize that a lot of the scriptures and the things that they were saying about moving away from something divine and then coming back, how when you would come back to it, you realize, it was always there. It's still just as strong as it was when I first kind of felt it. And then you move away and then you kind of live life and you have your passions and your desires. And then you start to realize that all of these passions and all of these desires, as they always say, it's never enough. You want more and more and more, and you fatigue yourself. And then only when you're at rock bottom, then you come back to, let me, do some japa. Let me do a bit of meditation. And it's just after that, it becomes, why do you have to hit rock bottom in order to appreciate the divine? Or why does it have to be so dramatic? Maybe if we just brought the divine into our lives in little ways every day, maybe everything will be better. And I found what happened was I started to naturally remove myself from situations or things that didn't hold divinity for me. So I used to work in fashion and makeup, and I think that was a natural progression for me, for the upbringing that I had, was to immerse myself in a fantasy. And then that was a natural thing, being queer and how you wear, you're embraced. Then I started to realize this is quite a toxic space for me, and to be honest, for most people that work in the industry. And I feel like it was a foundational thing, the Bhakti and the practices of yoga, because it's so repetitive. And that's what worked for me, and that's what still works for me. Yeah. Did
it really help you to help find out who you really are? Or to start to what we think what this part of us is really are at this moment, and how it's an evolution?
I would say 100%, and it was an amalgamation of many things, because before I embraced the Krishna consciousness or Bhakti in the way that I have in recent years, I guess the better word to say or how to frame it is that there's peaks and there's troughs and there's a flow and there's an ebb, and that's just a natural way that we move through life. So there's been times where I've kind of pulled away from the Bhakti because of the scenarios that I've been in where I haven't really felt that welcomed, or when I've looked around and I've seen that they're not really trying to engage with parts of the community that aren't showing up in the space in a way that I feel is more accessible. Or, I mean, these types of things, it's a bigger conversation, because when you look around most spaces, when you start to notice that a lot of the people are the same types of people, it's like, are we replicating and sustaining, the same types of people and inviting the same? Are we talking to the same people? Are we trying to talk to different people? Or are we just hoping that the people that are different will then just merge into the culture of which we are representing? And that is society in general. When you look at the hierarchies of life, like when you look at how when queers and people of color get into certain spaces, they kind of mimic the people around them. So what they are or how they identify is not as salient as it would be for people outside of these circles. So with that, I guess what I'm trying to say now is how it showed up for me coming into my fullness has been a long process, because I don't really see many people like me, in the sense of I represent, or I identify as non-binary. And it took me a long time to embrace that, especially within the yoga world where, you know, it's one thing being black, it's one thing being queer, but then you're going to add non-binary, and no one really understands what it means as well, and how things are weaponized within the media, which then, you know, a lot of these things over the last few years have become buzzwords, whereas Judith Butler and so many other writers spoke about this, so academic writers who you know, done so much research for gender studies. A lot of these terms are now coming to the forefront, and it's like it all kind of comes at the same time, and then it's everyone's using these terms at the same time. It's just like, where were all of these words 5 years ago, 10 years ago? You know, in my childhood, none of this was real. You were that, and everyone got along. And it's like, well, no, back then, no one even got along then. So this is just a natural progression of society as we know it now. And then in 10 years, non-binary maybe will be more appreciated or more respected. And I feel that that is something that's missing, the element of respect. So for me to embrace my identity in spaces that say that my identity is irrelevant is quite interesting, because I feel that there's a lot of dismissal and there is a lot of miseducation, I would say, with how we should engage with each other, because I find as well, especially in new age spaces or spiritual spaces, there is this flippant attitude or this spiritual bypassing to, oh, you know, everything's all light and love. And it's like, is it though? Because when we look at society, just not even having a vote, you know, just refusing to vote because you're in such a privileged position is a political stance. Going to certain yoga studios are a political stance. Going to the yoga training or embracing a certain way of life that is trendy, or not even trendy as such, but just engaging in certain practices and doing certain things is a political stance. And then we forget to kind of embrace the differences outside of our bubble that we've created for ourselves. And that's where the problems come from, because then we become dismissive and we become very defensive. So when you try to bring in the difference, it's immediately met with a reaction. And it's like in our yoga practices, when something comes up for us that we don't like, we instantly try to move and lean into something we do like. And
well, it's this thing about not wanting to deal with the uncomfortable.
Yes, yeah, precisely.
Do you know what I mean? And so there's a representation to a certain degree of something being uncomfortable, so we don't want to go there. And then, but then you're dealing with people, and the uncomfortable nature is the actual person.
Yeah.
It's important you do go there.
Yeah. And that's what I feel like me showing up now, I guess in recent years, in the way that I started to present myself, which has always been me underneath, it's just been what I've decided to show, because I was a bit fearful of backlash, or I was a bit fearful of highlighting things that may make people uncomfortable. But what I've started to realize is that as a creative, as an artist, it is essentially my duty to not so much challenge people, because I'm not going out of my way to make people uncomfortable, but by me showing up as my authentic self, if that is challenging you, then hopefully that will then start to purge. If, you know, the person is receptive to being purged, you know, it's here nor there. But I feel like the more people show their true selves, the more likely we are to comprehend the fact that our realities aren't just the truth. There's different truths working simultaneously. And we can try to protect and defend our space, but ultimately, beyond our spaces, there is so much more. So it's like, what is it that we are trying to preserve? What is it that we are clinging to? And what are we attaching ourselves to the point where anything outside of that is going to disrupt our world?
I think there's something really powerful in what you said. I was, as you're talking, I was thinking, you know, when one of my questions was going to be like, what is it, Vaun, that you are now fully open to showing? But it's more like, as you were talking, is like, what we don't want it to be is a statement.
Yeah.
We don't want it to be, you just want to go, this is me.
Yes.
And you don't have to go, this is a political, this is me, this is my fullness, and not have to kind of like go, and then you're gonna, like, you know what I mean? This is me, who I am.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah.
And it's that kind of, that bit in between that's kind of full of, you know, the stuff that we have to kind of merge through. It's almost like that's what I want for you. It's like, what is it? When you're showing yourself now, who is it? What is it you're showing of yourself?
I'm showing all of myself. I'm showing the parts that I keep secret. I'm showing the parts that make me ashamed. I'm showing the parts that make me curious. I'm showing the parts that give me joy. I'm showing the parts that make me emotional. I'm showing all of the parts that make me human. I'm showing all of the parts of myself that are relatable, and I'm showing all of the parts of myself that are disruptive. And I feel like that I'm living truthfully, because for so long I felt quite stifled, trying to understand how I should conduct or hold myself, or what would make me more lovable. What would make me more lovable? That's what for so long I was trying to figure out. But hearing myself say that then reminds me of, I guess, who I thought I had to be in order to protect my mum, to be seen as a good person, to make my mum or my dad or people around me love me and to value me, because I guess I never felt that. And then when you go through life like that, you start to then project that into everything that you're in. And the spaces I feel like it made me relate more to the outcasts. It made me relate more to the misfits, because I was always one of those people. And I feel like there's not enough misfits and there's not enough rebels in well-being, or maybe there are, but it's very specific. It's very like, okay, that is a manageable kind of rebel. That is like people say things and then they kind of they present it in a more palatable way, which, you know, when it's a business you kind of have to, because it's marketing, it's branding, it's so many layers. But then I've realized, okay, this hasn't served me. It hasn't made me any happier. It hasn't made me any more money, or like whatever I was doing it for. Like, what was the purpose of it for? And it's like, if I am really thinking about liberation and freeing people, why would I only spend my time focusing on specific people? I want to free and I want to liberate not only myself, but everybody. Everybody has to know about this, and everybody has to be liberated. Everybody has to evolve. Everybody has to ascend. And then when we all do that together, then we can move on, you know. I feel this is what it all comes back to. And I feel like this is the essence that I often feel that's missing in certain circles. And I'm not saying that, you know, I feel like sometimes it can be sound a bit self-righteous, like I am the chosen one. I'm not the chosen one. I don't even know who I am half the time. But whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm showing, I just feel like it's me holding a light saying, I'm all of these things. I'm crazy, I'm intelligent, I'm not so intelligent, I don't really know what I'm doing. Sometimes I'm fully in control, I feel empowered, I'm not so empowered, I'm vulnerable, I'm scared, I'm strong, I'm masculine, I'm feminine, I'm black on the outside, but sometimes I'm not black, because whatever black is a social construct. I'm queer, whatever that means to you. Maybe I was straight at one point, I don't think I ever was, but do you know what I mean? All of these things, all of these external factors that don't really hold much they don't allow you to hold much space for anything else. So I feel like for me, showing up in my fullness, whatever that is, whatever I decide to show, is me demonstrating a way to allow others to be themselves. And it is quite uncomfortable for me at times, not showing necessarily dark parts, but sharing things that I feel like I don't really want to share. I don't really have to share. And I'm not just talking about social media. I'm talking about how I show up for myself, how I show up in the spaces that I teach, how I show up for my friends and my family, because it doesn't have to be these big statements of being on a platform and amplifying voices. It's how you show up in your community. You know, like I remember when I used to live in Herne Hill, and there was a trans person named Sharon who used to walk around in such provocative ways. And was it appropriate all the time? Maybe it wasn't. But was it a conversation? Yes, it definitely was. And you know, when you see these people they obviously are just showing up for themselves, but they don't know the kind of impact that they're having on somebody else. And for me, it's about having an impact, because none of us are going to live forever. But how we kind of shine a light and kind of spread this light to others, to then make a rippling effect, to then go into the cosmos, to then return to something beyond the cosmos. I remember what you mentioned about from the macro to the micro to macro. Like on that scale, how do we present ourselves in a way that is liberating to us as individuals, to then liberate others, to create a crescendo of fullness for everybody to be their most authentic way, for them to be the most freest, and for them to be the most liberated, so that everybody's happy and able to connect to something beyond that thing of which they identify and which limits them.
And then there's the Vaun, who just is the Vaun with the people that they love.
Yeah.
Without all of that, we're just like the essence of something.
Yeah. And with the essence, I'm still working on it, because this is it. Like this has been a journey. This has been a journey from since I can remember. And it's only as I get older and I look back in hindsight, and that's really important. I feel like there is such a specific way that we go through life. Like we feel like, from our 20s to our 30s, that it's meant to be this journey, this specific thing, and that's the end of it. And it's constantly evolving. And this is why we need to have more conversations with people outside of our communities, people outside of our households, just different people, because then we can start to become more empathetic, more sympathetic to different ways that we can show up, not only for ourselves, but for others. Having these conversations, exposing yourself to new things, and I guess allowing that to be your essence, being curious. I'm always curious. And I feel that as well, I'm a Sagittarius, so double Sag, if anyone knows what that means. So rising and ascendant, and then my moon is in Virgo. So if you're an astrologer, you're probably like, that's why. But for me, it's always been about learning and expanding. And I feel that's probably why I'm here now.
Great, thank you, Vaun. So with all of that, with all of it, what is one thing that you'd like to share with others about what you've learned about yourself through all this time?
I would say it's about your intention and service. When you remember to serve others before yourself, in whichever way, big or small, this is where the magic truly happens, because how you are held down by your own issues, then it then becomes irrelevant, because you remember that you have to keep going, not for yourself, but for somebody else. And that is the biggest motivator that I could say has worked for me, and what I would like to share to others, for others. Yeah.
Thank you, Vaun.
Thank you so much.
That's wonderful.
Blessings.